Jack Dorsey made a largest statement on Twitter about the banning of Trump from Twitter. And I like to look at these CEO statements about controversial items to see how they did, just to see how the communication went, whether it's persuasive. So separating from the topic, I'm just going to talk about whether the communication was done well. As a response, I thought it was excellent. It's a complete acceptance of the situation. That's about as good as you can do. Completely accepting the complaints and telling you what they're going to do about it. Right? You can hate everybody, but this is good technique. It's an impossible situation, meaning that Twitter and the others, they really didn't have a clean winning path. So anybody who thinks, oh, just take the easy path, why didn't you do that? There was an obvious solution, but you did the wrong thing. That's not really what's happening here. But Twitter basically had two bad choices and had to pick one. They didn't have a choice of not picking, because not picking a choice is a choice too. So here's how Jack does this. And here's, I'll read some of the highlights from his thread. And I want you to see the technique, because it's really good. All right? Now, if you can separate from a moment what you currently feel about Twitter and what you think about Jack Dorsey, what you think about Trump, just separate from that for a moment. We'll just talk about the persuasion part, just the skill. All right? Forget about the politics. We'll just talk about the skill. The skill in this is extreme. It's really good. The first thing you need to do if you are going to deal with something this controversial is you have to acknowledge the complaining side. It is not good technique to say something like, somebody is complaining, therefore we're going to do X, Y, Z. It's not good enough just to note that there are problems or complaints. You need to describe the complaint in your own words as clearly as the complainers describe it. Right? So if you can't put it in your own words, what the other people are saying about you, it doesn't look like you understand it or accept it or treat it as valid. So that's the first thing you look for. And Jack did that perfectly, actually, in a few different ways. Let me give you some quotes. He says, he goes, I do not celebrate or feel pride in our having to ban Trump. So the very first sentence is, he's telling you he's not happy about it. That's pacing, because he knows the people who are looking at this are not happy about it. So the first thing he says is, I'm not happy about it either. That's good. Good technique. He's not happy about it either. His reasons may be different than yours, but we'll get to that. And he says that they made the decision with the best information they had based on threats to physical safety, blah, blah, blah. And then he asks the question, was this correct? Now, have I told you the technique of saying what people are thinking the moment they're thinking it? It's a really strong communication technique. It binds you to the listener. So at the very moment that Jack says in his tweet thread, was this correct, is exactly the moment you were thinking it. So he says, we made this decision based on our best information. And the moment you read that, you're saying, yeah, but was it correct? And then he says, was this correct? It's exactly the right sentence in exactly the right place. If you don't sort of study this stuff, you don't see how well this is constructed. It's actually engineered really, really well. So we'll get to some more. He says, I believe this was the right decision for Twitter. The right decision for Twitter. That's very transparent. Because what he did not say, I think it was the right decision for the country. And later he goes on saying, maybe it wasn't the right decision for the country. Maybe we need to do better. But he says directly, I believe this was the right decision for Twitter. Now, was it? Are you a CEO? Do you know if this was the right decision for Twitter? Would Twitter as a company, pursuing profits within a capitalist system, which is their right, was this the right decision? And I feel like maybe yes, maybe no. I'm not really sure. But I don't take that decision away from Twitter. I mean, it's their decision, right? I don't have a better idea. I might have played it differently, but I don't know if that would have been better for Twitter. So I think it's very transparent, and I appreciate that the first thing he says is, I think we made the right decision for Twitter, which is his job. His job is to make good decisions for Twitter. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't feel I have insight into that. And he talks about an extraordinary and untenable circumstance, meaning there wasn't any way to do everything right. That wasn't really an option. And that they basically took the reduction of harm as their highest priority. Pretty good, right? Now, if you were making the decision, you might have said, free speech has some rough edges. Maybe I'd prefer free speech even if people get hurt. Maybe I prefer free speech even if people get killed. I still might prefer it. But that's something you can say as an individual, right? That's not really something you can say if you're a leader exactly, because you can't be in favor of anybody getting killed under any circumstances. So they had an untenable situation, and he says they have to reflect on their operations and the environment around it. He acknowledges that it has a negative impact on the public, and that it's a pretty big one. So he's not minimizing whatsoever that this has an impact on free speech that could be a big deal. So he's saying it directly. That's good technique, because that's what you're thinking, right? You're thinking it's a big deal, and he acknowledges it. So that's good technique. And he says, and I think this part I like the most, because just listen to this, how well this is constructed. He says, the check and accountability on this power, the power of Twitter to ban people or not ban people, has always been the fact that a service like Twitter is one small part of a larger public conversation happening across the internet. If folks do not agree with our rules and enforcement, they can simply go to another internet service. Now, you don't agree with that, right? Here's the second part. The second part is he doesn't agree with it either. He's going to agree with you now. Watch how good this is. He says this concept, meaning the concept that you could just go somewhere else if you don't like Twitter, was challenged this week when a number of foundational internet tool providers, the social media platforms meaning, also decided not to host what they found dangerous. I do not believe this was coordinated. I agree with him that, there wasn't like a meeting to talk about it. More likely, companies came to their own conclusions and were emboldened by the actions of others. I think that's actually the way I see it. I don't think they needed a meeting, because you don't need to have a meeting and collude on something that you all kind of are going to just go the same direction anyway. So he's basically debunking the argument that Twitter could ban you and then you could just go somewhere else, because now we've seen in the real world that if there's something big enough for Twitter to ban you, you're probably going to be banned on the other platforms, or at least they'll be emboldened to do that. So he's acknowledging that argument doesn't work, and that was always their best argument. So when have you ever seen a CEO respond to a major public uprising by saying that their own argument doesn't work? I've never seen it before. I've seen people admit mistakes, but I've never seen anybody say our own argument doesn't work. Here's why. It's kind of remarkable. And again, try to separate from what you feel about Twitter, feel about Trump, feel about Jack Dorsey. Just look at the technique. It's kind of extraordinary. And then he talks about what they're going to do about it, which is the next part of a good CEO response. So they've got some kind of an effort that they're ramping up for some kind of a service that they would be a client of, their own entity. Well, I don't know who owns the entity. That might be, there's a question there. But the point is there's some plan that Twitter's doing to address directly the free speech thing so that everybody can get their free speech, but Twitter could also be protected and you as a user can see what you want to see. So they've got something they're working on. I don't know how long that's going to take. I'd like, it'd be better to have some transparency on that. But as a response, I thought it was excellent. It's a complete acceptance of the situation. That's about as good as you can do. Completely accepting the complaints and telling you what they're going to do about it. Right? You can hate everybody, but this is good technique.